Nanny Ray. She came to America around 1910 as a girl of 6 with her Ukrainian parents through Ellis Island. She grew up, got married, and settled down into the Bronx area of New York, living there for most of her life. And hers is the typical immigrant success story, interchangeable with many millions who came during that first wave of mass migration. And what we mean by that is that she and her yarn salesman husband were able to afford a comfortable, if modest, life in a 1-bedroom apartment in a 5-story building on Kruger Avenue in the South Bronx, living there for over 50 years together. And their children still describe their childhood growing up in the 1950s as idyllic, playing stoop ball outside with neighborhood kids every day. This is really the sort of urban planner's dream, right? You have decent amount of density, near public transit, and most importantly, with a tight-knit community that's rewarding for those who live in it. So Nanny Ray, she was able to send her kids to college, and she was able to see them start successful professional careers. And within the second generation, this Jewish immigrant family was able to achieve the American dream of social mobility. And the pinnacle of that was seen when the children were able to move out of the city and go buy their cookie-cutter homes in the sprawling suburbs of Long Island. And how were they able to achieve this so quickly, within 2 generations? And so, today we think of wealth building and affluence is very tied to home ownership. So it might surprise us to know that Nanny Ray never owned her own home. Okay, so how did she do this and achieve this success for her family? Well, partly just good timing and good fortune. So Nanny Ray moved into the Bronx in the early 1940s. This was the post-war period of housing boom. Construction was everywhere, and places were affordable and places were vacant and easy to get into. And so she got in at a low rent in the early 1940s, and crucially, she had a rent-controlled apartment. So she got in at the right time, and she enjoyed decades of very stable, secure way of life at much below market rent. Okay? And so this is how Nanny was able to achieve this lifestyle for her family. Okay? So obviously not everyone enjoyed this. People who came at a different time, they did not enjoy as much benefits as Nanny Ray did. And what if we think about today, her great-grandchildren? Would they be able to afford this similar comfortable lifestyle that she was able to deliver for herself and her family? Or successive waves of immigrants coming from Puerto Rico, coming as Black Americans in the Great Migration? Were they able to afford this kind of lifestyle as well? Well, today, if you want to live in a similar 1-bedroom unit as Nanny Ray did, Kruger Avenue, that's going to set you back about $1,900 per month. Okay, and again, this is to live in an apartment building that's the same vintage as Nanny Ray, right? This is not a modern, fancy, amenity-filled building here. This is something that's being poorly maintained because with rent control, there's not the incentive to maintain it to the full extent possible. And the other travesty is that it's actually hard to get into these substandard units or low standard units, right? So because of policy choices and not building enough units for population growth, we actually don't have enough availability, even at these prices, to get into these kind of places in places like the Bronx. Okay. And so what if we think about everyone's goal today, right? We all want to enjoy a nice standard of living. We need to have shelter, and we would love to have a comfortable lifestyle. But maybe things have shifted a little, and the mindset has changed a little beyond this. Partly this is because housing is so expensive, and we now see it as our main investment vehicle and our main investment in our retirement and our future security. And so the stakes are really high, right? When we're buying homes, we really don't want to lose our shirt in a housing bubble that we're sure is going to appear any moment right after we bought that damn house. Right? And so what this does is it creates a mindset, just a sort of natural evolution in people to start really being fearful about this investment that they've made, this high-stakes investment. And so it can really set in a feeling of not in my backyard, right? You are the incumbent, you've made this big investment, and you don't want them to build more housing. You don't want them to change the neighborhood in any way that would threaten the investment that you've made, okay? So this NIMBYism that is kind of a popular buzzword at the moment, this is something that has kind of naturally evolved from the housing market that we've created with our policy choices, okay? So this is kind of where I come into the story. So I'm also an immigrant like Nanny Ray. I arrived almost 100 years later from Ireland. And when I got to the US, I realized, gosh, these people are really positive all the time. And they seem really convinced that they can achieve things, just, hard work, and, it's definitely going to happen for them. And they can definitely achieve the American dream. And I sort of got infected with this mindset. I thought, okay, I think I can achieve things in this country. And, in Ireland, we're more into self-deprecation than self-affirmation. That's really our mindset. So this was a new thing for me, but I also felt, this sense of fairness and equity that I would like. So I want to achieve the American dream, but I don't want it to be at the cost of somebody else's achieving that dream as well. And what this also played into is my training as an economist. And so what I've learned over the years in many research and many studies that I've done is that cities are really important. They're a key driver of economic growth. In the US, 90% of economic activity is created in cities. Right? Innovating new products, creating good neighborhoods, having amenities that we all like to enjoy, these are things that are created mostly in cities. Okay? And so cities are really important places, and that makes housing really vitally important. Right? If we want to have fairness and equity, and that people can enjoy these same amenities that we think we're entitled to, we need to provide housing so people can live near those amenities. So this is actually how I got to meet one of the grandchildren of Nanny Ray and learn the story of her. And he's benefited from Nanny Ray also. I think she put him through college partly as well. And we're writing a book where we're trying to explore the historical evolution of housing policy, and we think New York as a global city is a really good example of the kind of problems that have developed over time. So what do we mean, what kind of policies are we thinking about here? So probably the evil buzzword of zoning is coming into your minds at this point, and certainly that's there. So making most forms of housing illegal makes it harder to build housing, right? And it certainly makes it harder to build multifamily housing, apartments, even duplexes, right, are illegal throughout most of America's cities. And so this is certainly a problem. If we go back, even looking further back into the 19th century, we see there's a lot of similar paternalistic spirit in housing, thinking about housing over time in the highest levels of policy making. And so often people had good intentions, but they just thought the poor are kind of immoral, or they kind of sloppy, and they're living in these awful housing conditions, and we need to do something about it. Okay? And so, do we want people to live in better conditions? Yes, but we also have to build more housing for everybody, right? And so these two goals kind of conflicted with each other, and we ended up getting more of the slum clearance and the ruining of poor neighborhoods, and less of the actual, let's build more housing for everybody to be able to have better neighborhoods. So how's it going at the moment in terms of policy? Well, it's maybe kind of one step forward, two steps back. In places like California, there's a lot of innovation in trying to get rid of single-family zoning. And there have been various bills that have come forward and are getting passed. And there seems to be more general consensus that these are the direction we need to move in. In places like New York, though, things have been a little bit more stalled, and so we've seen things like Mayor Adams declaring the city to be full. We don't need any more people here who we're going to house. Okay, and partly that was a response to immigrants being bussed into New York City, which obviously is a crisis point and makes things very difficult to cope with in that moment. But it also is sort of, again, a policy choice. It's folks saying, this is too big of a problem. We cannot solve this problem, and we're not going to try. We're just going to declare ourselves closed for business. The governor of New York also had a recent reasonable housing, house building program that was rejected because of, again, NIMBYism. And this was mostly NIMBYism in the suburbs where, again, people were worried about their home investments and didn't want to see more housing being built in those areas. So what can we do? Okay, well, there's a few things, a lot of things that would have to change are at a very high level, right? We need to maybe change zoning policy. We need to encourage building of affordable housing again, which has been stalled in most parts of the US for a long time. At an individual level, because all of those, okay, we could vote some people out of office, but it's going to take some time, right? What can we do in a more immediate sense? Since a lot of housing policy is very local, well, we can be a YIMBY, right? We want to say, yes, in my backyard. So when we're asked about, what do you think, will this change the character of the neighborhood, right? Something very vague that we could use to block more housing in our area. Well, we need to not just ignore that, but also stand up against that kind of thinking and say, we actually want to have an inclusive society where everybody gets to have nice things and everybody gets a chance to live in good neighborhoods, good schools, safety, clean air, and so forth. So coming back to Nanny Ray, I don't know if she would be a YIMBY or a NIMBY, not sure. Hard to say. But it was no accident that Nanny Ray was able to send her children to college and achieve that social mobility for her family. She benefited from being an incumbent to some extent and from having that rent-controlled apartment where others did not have that access. Okay? So when she finally left and retired to Florida in the late 90s, her rent was about $500 per month. And this had represented about a tenfold increase over the 50 years, which is about average for people who had stayed in an apartment in New York over that time period. But the market rate increase was a 22-fold increase. Okay, so she was getting a big discount that had grown over time over those 50 years. And so all of that money she didn't spend on housing for 50 years, she was able to invest in her children and her grandchildren. Okay? And so, Nanny took advantage. That was great for her and her family. But in our divided nation, having this kind of housing policy that pits certain kind of renters versus other kinds, and that doesn't allow access to good neighborhoods for all, is going to really just increase that divisiveness over time. So we need a new housing policy, and we need to choose to be YIMBYs.